Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar series with Ecolab. We have Scott Aaliyah, Senior Corporate Account Manager, and Matthew Rhodes. Today's webinar will be recorded, and available after sometime this evening. We'd love to hear from you. There's a Q&A box down on your right-hand side if you logged in through your computer. Please, you can start asking your questions now, and we're going to save them for the end. And I'm going to hand it over to Scott.
Thank you, Shah, and thank you to the New Jersey Restaurant and Hospitality Association for allowing Matt and myself to present this cleaning and disinfectant guidance for food service. So for those people that I haven't gotten an opportunity to meet, my name is Scott Aaliyah. I'm a Senior Corporate Account Manager for Ecolab. I've been with Ecolab for 23 years in several different roles. Most of my time in Ecolab was spent in the field as a territory representative, going into your restaurants and checking out your dish machines and your cleaning procedures and consulting and helping with issues. That's what most of my career was. Before that, I was a restaurant manager for 6 years. So in addition to me, helping me is going to be Matt Rhodes. He's a Senior Technical Account Specialist in our R&D department. And I'll let Matt talk a little bit about himself. Matt actually works normally at our headquarters in St. Paul, but is actually coming to us live from Alaska. Apparently, St. Paul, Minnesota was just not cold enough for Matt, and he felt he needed to go north for the weather. So, Matt, take it away.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Scott. Yeah, if you're wondering who the people are in those pictures, believe it or not, that is Scott and myself. So I am coming to you from Alaska, but regularly headquartered out of St. Paul, Minnesota. I work in our research and development division. So I work really closely with Scott on really the more technical side. So I'm really heavily involved in the development process of new chemicals and procedures and protocols, as well as equipment that utilizes those chemicals, and then bringing new innovation and products out to our corporate account customers, as well as taking feedback from the field and bringing it back to our research and development facility so that we can use that information to, reformulate and come out with new innovations as well. So thanks, Scott. I'll pass back to you.
Okay, great. So our agenda, really, we've all resumed operations with outside dining being open for several weeks, and as of September 1, inside dining at 25%. So we're just going to try and give you some guidance on how you can be safer for your employees and your guests, and as important, make our customers feel safe so they feel comfortable coming back into restaurants, particularly as the cooler weather comes and some of those people that wanted to be in outside dining are going to want to move inside. We want to make sure that they feel safe coming inside and dining in our restaurants. So understanding the risk factors, I don't think we need to spend too much time on this. I think everybody's pretty well versed on the risk factors associated with coronavirus. The only thing I would say about that is I do think the level of vigilance in some things is starting to slip back a little bit, and it's really going to be important that we stick by the requirements that are needed, because if we start having these outbreaks, as we're seeing happening in different areas of the tri-state area, it's going to impact our businesses, and we don't want to go back to being closed down. So where we're going to focus on is the two most important areas for not spreading coronavirus is personal hygiene and environmental hygiene. Obviously, personal hygiene affects anything that you or your employees do as far as hand washing and social distancing and such, and then environmental factors are the cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting, and we're going to get into some of the differences and challenges of each. So when we're resuming operations, these are the areas that Matt and I are going to focus on today: the dining room and the front of the house, the kitchen and the back of the house, and then, of course, the restroom area, which presents its own challenges because obviously that can be a heavily trafficked and heavily soiled area. And Matt, I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Okay, so thank you, Scott. So again, my name's Matt Rhodes. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the specifics regarding safeguarding your employees when resuming operations. So you can jump right to the next slide, Scott. Okay, so first and foremost, we say you need a plan. When developing your plan, there's a few major things you'll want to consider. A really good place to start is educating all staff on symptoms and everything COVID-19, how you'll be monitoring them to minimize transmission inside the restaurant. And really this plan will ensure that as business continues to ramp up, you have healthy employees to staff the operation, as well as customers that visit that operation feel safe and have that peace of mind. So a few of the major action items. One of the biggest things you can do is make sure all staff are trained on the new operational procedures. We're going to talk about what that new normal looks like. We're going to talk some specifics about what these actual procedures will look like later on, but make sure that the staff are in tune with these. Things aren't like they were before. They're going to need to know the protocols, and they're going to get asked by about the protocols by customers. So make sure they'll know how to answer those types of questions. So we say make sure there's an area, in every area there's an expert in your operation. So in the back of the house, make sure there's an expert in that area. In the front of the house, make sure there's an expert in that area. Someone who cleans and disinfects restrooms, make sure there's an expert in that area as well. So continuously educate. CDC and World Health Organization are continuously coming out with new protocols, new memos, and new information as they continue to study this new virus. So staying up to date on that, as well as local regulations. So New Jersey, as well as your specific cities, may come out with specific regulations that aren't necessarily applied to the entire country. Stay up to date with that. And then monitor your employees, emphasize the importance of staying home when sick, when showing any signs associated with COVID-19, or when they've come into close contact with someone who is sick. And then, of course, reinforce personal hygiene, social distancing, cough etiquette, make hygiene materials available. You can't wash your hands if there's no soap to do so. So make sure that is available for everyone in the facility. We'll talk a lot about disinfection of hard, non-porous surfaces today using disinfectants. And then lastly, create your own policies. Everyone in every facility is a little bit different. So making custom policies for worker protection specific to those facilities and businesses, and training employees on how to use the chemicals is very important. You can jump to the next slide, Scott.
Matt, one thing I'm going to add, just I guess the New Jersey flavor, I guess I'll say, as part of the governor's executive order, it is a requirement that you have a written plan for safety as it relates to COVID-19. It's required to have that. So if the health department comes in, they may or may not, but that is something they are supposed to be looking for and checking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good call out, Scott.
For those of you that are members, NJRHA has one available for you. If you like, I will put my email address or in the chat box, and you can just email me and request a template for the COVID-19 preparedness plan.
Great. Okay. All right. So, one of the best ways you can approach this pandemic is really in a proactive way instead of a reactive way. So what do I mean by that? There are really a few things that can be done to lower the opportunity for transmission and infection in the first place, instead of dealing with it after the case. So here's kind of a list of actions that I would consider low-hanging fruit that can really make a major difference in the spread of COVID-19. So this will sound like a broken record, I promise you, but wash your hands. It's It sounds very elementary and very easy, but it's such a great way and simple way to reduce risk. And we'll touch even more on this later on, but it's found to be one of the easiest things you can do and one of the highest transmission points. Covering your mouth and nose when coughing and sneezing, and disposing of soiled tissues in the proper waste container. Staying home when you're ill and when you come in contact with someone who is ill. Cleaning and disinfecting. So I'll say that it's really easy to become desensitized to the environment around you and kind of get in a motion of cleaning certain areas. But it's really important to step back and take a look at the whole facility, recognize and identify those high touch points, make sure you recognize those areas that aren't cleaned and maybe weren't cleaned previously and that need a little more attention. So look at it as a new kind of environment altogether. And then lastly, these considerations are above and beyond the personal hygiene measures previously discussed. So washing hands and correctly and avoiding any unnecessary physical contact with other employees, guests, residents, or customers. So we'll talk about all that today, I promise you. But you could jump to the next slide, Scott, and we can talk a little bit more about hand hygiene.
Matt, one thing I want to add, if I could, well, actually two things. One, if you have a positive COVID test that you are aware of, either by one of your employees or by a guest, you are required by the state of executive order to shut down for 24 hours and then do an extended cleaning according to CDC protocols. And it also is required that you take temperatures and do medical checks of your employees before they start the work shift. It is recommended but not required for customers. So just wanted to put that out there as part of some of those things that we can do to help prevent the spread. Obviously, we have an employee that comes in with an over 100-degree fever. That's someone who should not be allowed to work.
Yeah, good call out. Okay, so getting really specific into hand hygiene. Again, hands are the primary mode of transmission. So hygiene needs to be taken really seriously in this area. And we say hand washing with soap and water is key. I get asked a lot of questions about, well, can you just use a hand sanitizer in place of hand soap and hand washing? So my stance and our stance as Ecolab and doing the research is that hand washing is the number one thing you can do. Removing those soils, removing those viruses is the first best thing you can do. Again, that not every area has plumbing and has access to hand washing sinks. So we do recommend in those areas, especially high traffic, that you do not have that available, to make something else available like hand sanitizer stations. So hand hygiene should be performed, and you can jump back real quick, Scott. It should be performed really before or after a shift or break. There's a lot before or after using the restroom, before or after cleaning or attending to a customer, before eating, after eating. Really a lot of easy steps here to follow, but making sure you lather the hands and get the backs of the hands and between the fingers, under the fingernails as much as possible. Sing the happy birthday song twice or for at least 20 seconds. Those are really the key parts. Just make sure you get that soap full coverage on your hands. So you can jump to the next slide, Scott. So gloving, this is something that, as Ecolab, Scott and I, it's kind of burned into our minds because it's one of the things we go through in training right away. But making sure your employees are up to speed on putting on and taking off gloves. So at Ecolab, we do something called the ketchup test. So we cover gloves fully in ketchup, and we try to remove the gloves without getting any ketchup on your hands. So an exercise as simple as that can really teach the way to remove gloves, because you don't want to get any soils or anything that's on the outside of the gloves directly on your skin. So practice this with your employees, practice this as a group, because it's something that's important, especially with those biohazard type spills that can really come in handy. And you don't always need to know it right away, but when something like a biohazard spill does happen, or if your employees are wearing gloves all the time, this is a must know, need to know type of exercise. So you could jump to the next one, Scott. So now I'm going to kind of shift your attention a little bit more towards environmental hygiene and talk more in depth about cleaning and disinfection. Next slide. Okay, so I hear this a lot. What is this new normal What is the new daily life going to look like in some of these restaurants for the staff? Obviously, things are going to be a little bit different now. It's not going to be like it was before. There's going to be some changes. But overall, the still core pillars are going to really still be in effect. It might just be a little bit heightened in those areas. So now we've always provided, best practices for cleaning throughout an operation. There will be a behavioral shift that will be required to make sure that employees understand and explicitly follow the proper environmental hygiene procedures. So if you look in the bottom right of the slide there, you can see what we call the 5 factors of clean. So these are time, temperature, chemical action, mechanical action, and overall procedures. So we say that if any one of these areas is missing, the level of clean goes down overall quite dramatically. So I would argue that right now, that outer line, that overall procedures, are more important and more key than ever before. So the best practices that we'll discuss today are meant to reinforce the importance of not only selecting the proper solution, but also the importance of these overall procedures. Next slide. Okay. So there's a few things I want to cover here. And I know these 3 words on this slide get thrown around quite often and are often misused even in marketing commercials, things you'll see in media. So I want to make sure it's really clear what the definitions of each of these 3 words are. So I look at them as 3 different tiers. The lowest tier is cleaning, which is on the left there. Cleaning is simply removing any soils such as food particles or dirt or in some cases viruses and bacteria, but just physically removing that soil. And usually it's using a soap or something with a surfactant in it. You go up 1 tier and you get that middle category, which is a sanitizer. So a sanitizer by definition is something that reduces the amount of bacteria on an inanimate surface. It does not necessarily eliminate, it only reduces. And this only includes bacteria. So a sanitizer does not do anything for viruses. So keep that in mind. So COVID-19, if it's a sanitizer, sanitizers aren't targeting viruses and don't have claims for viruses. And then you go up 1 more tier. On the right-hand side, you get a disinfectant. So a disinfectant is used on non-living surfaces and objects to destroy or irreversibly deactivate infectious bacteria and viruses. So this does do elimination for viruses as well as bacteria. So COVID-19, you're looking for a disinfectant. This would be the proper tool that you would want to make sure that you're taking care of SARS-CoV-2. So both sanitizers and disinfectants are regulated by the US EPA and are used to manage public health risks. So we say that the label is the law. And so whatever it says on these product labels, this is where you're going to find the contact times, how long the product needs to sit. You'll find the ingredients. You'll find the safety information and the EPA label reference. So all the information should be right on the label. And we'll talk more about that. You can jump to the next slide there, Scott. Okay, so as I mentioned, it's really important to pay attention to the label when using a disinfectant. The steps listed here are high level at using a disinfectant on how to use that disinfectant. And these should be followed for all non-food contact surfaces. So this would not include places like food prep areas where you're actually physically preparing food and food's directly touching those surfaces. This is for areas like, for example, handrails and doorknobs, places that food won't come in contact. So the first step is a pre-clean step. So if there's any visible soil present, such as food or dirt on that surface, then you need to remove those soils. Because the key is we want to actually target the surface beneath those soils. So if you're just treating the dirt itself, it's not actually penetrating and getting down to that hard surface underneath. So pre-clean, remove that soil first. Step 2 is actually apply the disinfectant itself. So make sure it's a product that has claims that you want based on the label. But look at the application method, and you can either spray or use immersion with a cloth or a mop, however, depending on what the label allows you to do. And now the third step is the most critical step. Wait. So that product must sit with a specific contact time on a surface in order to achieve the viruses and bacteria that are claimed on that label. And contact times can really vary from 1 minute out to 10 minutes, which means if it had a 10-minute contact time, you would need to spray it on a surface and let it sit wet for 10 minutes before it actually kills what it says on the label. So make sure you know the contact times for your chemicals. And then the last is dry. So you can let it air dry or wipe the surface to remove that residual chemical. Next slide. And if there's questions here as well, you can submit those on the chat and we can address those at the end. Okay, so let's talk about food contact surfaces. So food contact is things that food will come directly in contact with. So let's say you've got a food prep table where you're making a pizza in the back of the house. So the same first steps will apply, but I want to talk, usually in the past, a sanitizer was just fine on these surfaces. You could just use a food contact safe sanitizer to treat these surfaces, you're good to go. With kind of this new normal, a lot of areas and a lot of customers have really shifted towards disinfecting these surfaces so that they do take care of those viruses. But if you do use a disinfectant on a food contact surface, there's a few extra steps you need to take that you wouldn't have taken before with a sanitizer. So the first step, pre-clean, remove that soil. Second step, apply the disinfectant, the same as before. Wait for that contact time. Make sure it achieves that contact time to kill the viruses and bacteria. But the key difference here is after using it on a food contact, you'll need to rinse it away with potable water and then go over it again with a food contact safe sanitizer. So if you do not do that, then technically you are going against the food code because you are leaving residual disinfectant, which is not meant to be left on food contact surfaces. So pay attention to that. You can jump to the next slide, Scott. Okay. So I get asked a lot, how often do I need to clean? How often should I actually clean a surface? And so some local jurisdictions will tell you an actual time. So I'm not going to say that there's no areas that will actually specify a time, but in general, it will depend on a number of factors. There's no easy blanket answer that's correct for every facility, every customer, every restaurant, every geography. So this is a decision that could be made at the unit level, could be mandated at the corporate level, but regardless, it should definitely be reevaluated as certain environmental variables change. Some of these environmental variables, and you can see in the graph here, include infection risk, foot traffic, and soil load. So if you have a customer base or in an area where the infection risk, maybe the population tends to be a little bit on the older side, maybe that would increase the frequency of cleaning and disinfection slightly because that's more at-risk population. Foot traffic, if you're somewhere downtown that gets a lot of in and out versus somewhere a little bit more off the grid that gets much fewer foot traffic, then that's something to consider as well. And then soil load, if it's a very heavily soiled area, and depending on what type of food you're cooking, what types of environment it's in, that's something to consider as well. So if any of those increases, you'll want to clean and disinfect a little more frequently. Next slide. And Scott, I'll let you jump in here to give a little update on this.
Okay. So as Matt brought up, if you're using a disinfectant or any product that you're going to use that is going to kill COVID, it needs to be on the EPA's N list. These are products that the EPA has certified for emerging pathogens claim, which includes COVID-19. So if you want to know if your product is on this list, you can go to the EPA website and you can go on the N list. I would not recommend putting the product name in because the name of your product, it could be one product that might have 10 different names to it in various forms that a manufacturer sells to someone. Put in the reg number. If the reg number pops up, then that product is certified to be used against COVID-19. So as far as chemistry goes, I can really only talk about Ecolab chemistry. So the first one that I'll discuss is our peroxide multi-surface cleaner and disinfectant. I know many people on this line already use this product. It's a 3-in-1 product. It's a hard surface cleaner, so it can be used on non-food contact counters, walls, door handles. It also is a glass and window cleaner. It is a hospital grade disinfectant, so it can be used as a bathroom cleaner. So you can basically use, combine all those products into one. It has a very fast kill time. We normally run it at 6 ounces a gallon. And when we run it at that level, it is a 45-second kill time for noro and COVID-19. That's really important in the restaurant and hospitality industry, because if we're doing door handles, I mean, we have people touching those very, very frequently. We can't afford that 10-minute contact time like Matt referred to before, which some disinfectants have. And this product is a very, very cost-effective product to use. It's run through a dispenser. We have it in a ready-to-use form. Dispenser is a more cost-effective way to do it. In addition to this product, something that we've come out new, the challenge that we have, as Matt explained before, with using disinfectants on food contact surfaces is that if you use a disinfectant on a food contact surface, you must rinse and then go over it with a food contact sanitizer. That is a bit of a laborious and time-consuming process that slows your staff down. So to meet this challenge, we, a little over a month ago, came out with the Smart Power Sink and Surface Cleaner Sanitizer. It is a product that can be used in the third compartment sink. Can be used in a sanitizer bucket. It can be used in a spray bottle, and can be used to clean, sanitize any food contact surface. And what makes it so unique is it is a sanitizer with a norovirus and emerging pathogens COVID-19 claim. It's a sanitizer with a virucidal claim. So you do not have to do that rinse step that you have to do with a disinfectant. You basically spray it on, leave it on for the correct contact time, which is actually 30 seconds, which is an incredibly quick time. You wipe it, spray it on again, wipe it, let it air dry, and you're done. So it's one product, 2 easy steps, eliminate the rinse step, and that should be used on basically any food contact surface you would. As Matt said, a table in the back where you're making pizzas, you can use it on a cutting board, a dining room table, slicer, anywhere where you need to clean and sanitize, this is the perfect product for that. Again, extremely cost-effective product to use for food contact cleaning and sanitizing. Basically, with these two products, you can basically clean, disinfect, sanitize every non-floor surface in your establishment and keep your employees and your guests safe. This product, one thing is different. Most of the third sink or countertop food service sanitizers are quat based. So they use a quat test strip, which many of you are used to using, a quat 40 or QT10 test strip. This is actually a different chemistry. It uses dodosylbenzene sulfonic acid and lactic acid. So it's got a separate, different test strip to it, which we can provide for you. And then Matt, I believe I will turn it back to you.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Scott. And if anyone on the line is unfamiliar with this product or wondering why they haven't seen it before, this is a brand new product. So this is a new to market product, new active ingredient system. So it's just rolling out now. So really excited about it. We've had some really good success already with the product, and it really came at a great time because, like Scott said, it's got the COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2 claims on it. but it's also food safe. So really excited about it. So I'm going to shift a little bit towards talking about some specific procedures, starting with the front of the house in food service. So recent surveys have really shown that the top consideration for selecting a restaurant is the very one thing is that it's clean and sanitary. And this consideration is even more important to guests than the location or even the taste of the food, which I found really eye-opening. So it's obvious that it's really crucial that, you know, the front of the house is clean and being treated as if, you know, each surface could be a transmission point. So another top requirement for those venturing out to restaurants as they reopen and as they ramp up are that common areas are deep cleaned daily. So surfaces are sanitized and disinfected between customers. Menus, things that are, you know, used between one customer and another are either made so that they're disposable or they're cleaned and disinfected in between use. So one of our best practices include disinfect all high touch points, non-food contact surfaces frequently. And how frequently we go back to and ties back to that chart that we went over. But it'll be up to the units itself. Train the staff on proper hand hygiene protocols, PPE use, and cleaning procedures for food contact versus non-food contact surfaces. Minimize the items offered on tables. So things that previously were okay, maybe condiments, salt and pepper shakers, menus, things like that. Maybe consider removing those or making them disposable or treating them with a disinfectant if possible in between uses. Encourage social physical distancing by spreading out tables. I'm sure you all know that already. Encourage staff to minimize the use of high traffic areas or even shut down some high traffic areas if possible to prevent people from gathering in those areas. And then of course, eliminate any food debris, pest activity. Pests are another thing we don't think about, but those are also transmission points for viruses and bacteria. So we want to make sure those are at a minimum as well. And then, you know, we talk a lot about grab and go items or expanding the takeout menu. Those things are still very important. But again, we want to make it back to the point where inside of a restaurant is to a point where guests can feel clean and safe and get that peace of mind that that area has been disinfected and that it's not going to be a high transmission area. So you can jump to the next slide, Scott. Okay. Okay, so shifting a little bit to back of the house. So, you know, currently there's no major evidence and there's still a lot of research being done on the transmission of COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, in association with food or food packaging. So we get asked that a lot. Can food actually transmit or transfer viruses like SARS-CoV-2? So there's no evidence to support that right now, but still we need to take it very seriously on treating this food contact area as if it could be a transmission point. So for the back of the house and kitchens, best practices are pretty similar to the front of the house. We're still saying really disinfect all high touch points and non-food contact surfaces and high traffic areas. So think of handles on all the equipment, doorknobs, handrails, you know, the carts that are used to move things around, everything where that your hands touch, and pay attention and be mindful as you go through that back of the house. Those are areas that need to be disinfected. So focus on those. Ensure that all the hand washing stations are convenient, highly visible, and stocked with product. And then in those areas without hand washing stations, think about something like a hand sanitizer station. Ensure physical distancing of employees, thoroughly clean drains, and eliminate any standing water. This will help with you know, tracking debris and soil throughout a facility, but also help with the pest activity. So that's a key as well. So you can jump to the next slide, Scott. We're going to talk a little bit more about public areas.
Matt, one thing I want to add, as we discussed before, and actually as the governor's executive order, if you read it, it actually says to not use disinfectants on food contact surfaces. Now, it's a little bit, there's kind of a little bit of information left out there because you can, if you rinse with fresh water and go over with a quad sanitizer. But some of the issues I'm running into is, I know a lot of our customers have hired people to come in and spray a disinfectant throughout their building and sometimes through their kitchen. If you are spraying food contact surfaces with the disinfectant, it has to be rinsed and sanitized. You can't just spray it at the end of the night and leave it. The second thing is some of them are saying they're using sanitizers to do this spraying, but these sanitizers do not have the EPA certification for emerging pathogens and COVID-19. So before you spend your hard-earned money on doing stuff like that, you might want to check with whomever's doing it. If you're an Ecolab customer, you can check with your representative. They can kind of guide you. Because some of these procedures and or products that they're using are not really being used according to the code or are not effective.
Yep. Good call out, Scott. Okay, so jumping back into procedures with public areas. So this is the area where disinfection should actually be taken the most seriously as far as frequency. So they're saying this should be the highest frequency area as far as disinfection and cleaning is concerned. Because this is the areas where people convene, people gather, and that there's no access to hand washing typically and plumbing in these areas. So having a good plan for the public areas in your facilities, like the front lobby, for example, where people can wait is really critical. And it's something that guests and customers will look at right away. And use to consider, revisiting or actually sitting down in that restaurant. So disinfection, of course, on the high touch points. And then as we discussed, risk factor is a huge determination in this frequency. So you'll be up to deciding how frequent. But the best practices for these, regardless of what they are, make sure that all hard, non-porous, even non-high touch point areas are disinfected and deep cleaned occasionally, but those high touch points need to be disinfected frequently throughout the day. And then in these areas, you can also consider providing disinfectants or cloths for use by staff and guests. So something that when they walk in to these areas, they have access to and they can use as well. Next slide. Restrooms. So restrooms is one of those areas you should definitely be using a disinfectant on most surfaces in a restroom. Typically you want a wider coverage of viruses and a wider spread on the claim set for the disinfectant that you're using. The easy news about the restroom is that there's no food contact surfaces in this area. So you can really use a disinfectant in most places, but you may need in urinals and toilets and other areas a different disinfectant that also has something that's good for the specific soils that build up in those areas. But glass cleaner is very common in this area as well. It's something that you'll need. Sometimes you'll find a multi-purpose disinfectant that can also be used as a glass cleaner to eliminate the wide array of products that you'll need in this area. But the same news applies for restrooms. Make sure you are using a disinfectant on all the high touch points and continuously disinfecting throughout the area. So one person should be going and treating this restroom or the multiple restrooms fairly frequently, if not as frequently as the public areas. Next slide. And then lastly, employee break rooms. So this is something we thought we'd cover because this is something that can go unnoticed and may not be as cleaned as often and disinfected as often because this isn't something that's typically visible to the front of the house or to guests visiting. So this is an area that we're saying focus on this as well because we also don't want transmission between staff, and those high touch points in that area are just as important as those high touch points in the front of the house. So we're also saying that a good idea in all these scenarios is start posting publicly your cleaning and disinfection schedule so that guests can see when and how often you're cleaning, and it'll give them that peace of mind and that reassurance that yes, this facility is taking all precautions and making sure that they are doing the cleaning and disinfection that they should be doing. So it's not something that may have been that common before, but a guest walking in and seeing that really makes a big difference, and we found that it's something that a lot of customers are starting to do. So at this point, I will pass it back to Scott to talk a little bit about customer assurance.
Just some short guidance, some customer assurance tactics, because we really are doing two things here. We're keeping the public safe and our employees safe, but we also need to make them feel safe. We just had a survey that's put out that 66% of the public are still not comfortable going back to inside dining. So in order to make them feel comfortable, we're just advising these customer assurance tactics. One, script a message for your employees to share with customers upon arrival. Also, it's very helpful if your customers are using, whatever product they're using to clean, disinfect, or sanitize the surfaces, that they actually know what the product is and what it does. If you're an Ecolab customer, your Ecolab representative can help do in-service training for your staff to teach them that. Increase the frequency of cleaning and disinfection in public spaces. On the NJRHA website, we did a similar one of these guidances back in June. On that particular one, which I think you can still access on the website, there's actually what Matt went over for each department, the public area, back of the house. There are actual procedure instructions on there. There are actually a checklist of things you can do. And there is also a sheet that you can have your employees initial as to who is handling this, and actually keep a record of what you're doing. That would be something, if you printed that out and posted it, that I think would make a really good impression on the customers, to show how frequently you're doing these touch points and such. Communicate cleaning standards to your customers. That's really become a big issue. As one restaurateur I spoke to said, he said, cleaning and cleanliness is the new ambiance in restaurants. It's that important to the customers. Be clear about expectations for customer behavior in common areas. Customers have to wear masks until they actually sit down to eat. It's a difficult one sometimes to enforce, of course, unless they have some type of condition that prevents them from, or unless they're under the age of 2. Provide disinfectant for customers at tables. We should either be disinfecting and doing the rinse and sanitize step, or using a product like our Smart Power Sink and Surface Sanitizer. Where available, provide hand sanitizer in high traffic areas that do not have soap and water, and give customers the opportunity to provide feedback for cleanliness. That's really important to get to know what they're thinking as they come in establishment, and we can make improvements. If you have any questions or concerns about procedures, products, we have a lot of information on our coronavirus website. You can see it there, www.ecolab.com/coronavirus. This is free to anyone. You don't have to be an Ecolab customer to do it. You can go right on there, and all these different fact sheets and readiness kits and checklists are all on there for you to look at, download, whatever you need to do. We put it out there to help everybody in the industry. And so I think that's pretty much everything we needed to cover. So Shah, I guess you can go to the Q&A.
Hello. We have one question, and that question is in regards to back of the house staff having to wear a mask. They do not have to wear a mask if it inhibits their health, or if they are working on an open fire flame. And you can find that information. Actually, I put the link in the chat for the Department of Health's guidance for indoor dining. To be exact, it says, except where it would inhibit the individual's health, or where doing so would create an unsafe condition in which to operate equipment or execute a task. Example, cooks that work near open flames. Employers must provide all employees with such face coverings. So your back of the house staff, the ones that are preparing food over a flame, are not required to wear a mask while doing so.
Shaw, one thing I want to add about the masks, I said this the last time we did this. There's still a lot of people that I've heard of that are doing things like disinfecting their own masks. So what I would tell you is please follow the manufacturer's recommendations and nothing more or less, because some people are spraying disinfectant on a mask. They think they're rinsing it, whatever they're doing, and then they put it on. And, there's a reason why the disinfectants have to be rinsed and sanitized on food contact surfaces, because we don't want them ingested because they're too strong. Breathing them in when they're evaporated or whatever the case may be is probably even worse. So please make sure if you're reusing masks that they're designed for that and that you're following the manufacturer's procedures.
We here at NJRHA agree.
I'm glad to hear that.
As your partner, yes, we definitely agree. Again, if you have any more questions, we have a few more moments. You can type them in the Q&A section, and we will be more than happy to answer them. Also, we have something in chat. Are disinfectants mandated by local offices of Department of Health? So the local Department of Health is going by the CDC guidelines for the most part. So you do need to use a product that kills the norovirus, if that answers your question.
Matt, I believe most of the health departments, and you can confirm this, most of them go by the FDA food code.
Mm-hmm.
So if you consult the FDA food code, but yes, you need to use disinfectants on non-food contact surfaces that is required.
Yeah.
That are FDA approved.
Yeah, and it's a good question. So you've got the EPA on one side, and most disinfectants and sanitizers need to be registered with the EPA and do extensive testing to make sure that you have the claims for those specific organisms. And then on the other side, you've got the FDA, which designs the food code. So the food code, designates what kind of cleaning and practices are required with the use of those products. And typically they'll require or suggest and guide with a EPA registered product. So EPA is kind of the law when it comes to disinfectants and sanitizers. FDA is kind of the law when it comes to that specific food code itself. But really you want procedures and products that abide by both so that you're following both protocols. Good question.
To answer Ben's question, this webinar will be available later this evening up on our website. And I know your email personally, so I'll send you an email with the link to it. Any other questions? Well, looks like we don't have any more questions coming in. I would like to thank you, Scott and Matthew. You two are always the best. And we enjoy our partnership with Ecolabs.
Thank you, Shah.
Thank you.
And thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Shah.
Have a great day.
I want to go fishing.
You got it.